Thank you so much. And thanks everyone for joining. You've succeeded already by joining our panel today on failure. This is the Failure Panel 2.0, Failing Well and Why It Is Okay to Fail. As Amrit mentioned, so my name's Pete Hammer. I'm head of insights at Warner Brothers Discovery now. So we're part of the global media giant and growing every day. And I'm joined by some great industry leaders also in their fields who will share their journey and reflections on their failures. We'll dig deep into the failures and what has made them the achievers that they are today. And achievers they are. We're joined by three very esteemed leaders in our field. So first of all, Nick Clark, who is Head of Customer Insights at Cathay Pacific Airways. Nick has spent more than a decade in the travel and tourism industries, both from an agency and client-side roles across customer insights, experience and strategy. We've got Madhumita Chakraborty, who's Global Head of Marketing Performance and Analytics of the print category of HP. She leads a team driving performance-based global marketing investment planning and budget allocations, as well as spearheading performance measurement and ROI analytics. I hope I got that all right. And also we've got Praveen Shakar, Interim CEO of SMR. He is an outlier marketer, which I was very keen to find out more about, and we would have a whole panel on that if we could, but unfortunately, we need to focus on his efforts as chairman and CEO of Kriya, India's leading healthcare decision support company and managing partner of Crux 108, an outlier marketing consulting firm. Now, it would be remiss of me not to invite you all to ask your questions as well. We'd love to have this as a really engaging discussion where you get to take part too. So I'll try my best not to fail when it comes to bringing the energy to the questions that you ask through the chat, and you can actually raise your hand and be part of the discussion if you wish. But let's jump straight in. And Nick, I might point the spotlight at you for the first question, which is name one failure you've experienced in the workplace in recent years, and how did you respond?
Sure. Thank you, Pete, and thank you for the kind words. Esteemed kind of leader in this area is I don't associate myself with that, but that's very humbling. In terms of a failure, I think I might share one that's not so much just like project based, but a little bit more personal. So a few years ago, it was a pretty intense time at work, and I think my failure was really not self-management that effectively. So got to a point where we were working on lots of different streams of work, tight deadlines, as we all know, and I kind of was just really stressed and burnt out. And I think the way I responded initially was the wrong way. I was like blaming the context, the environment, as opposed to going, you know what, maybe it's me, and I need to take a step back, be a little bit better at understanding kind of trigger points of when I was getting a bit too stressed or not effectively managing the situation myself. And the key learning was it's totally okay to kind of put your hand up and say, I kind of need a bit more help. One, two, that balance of prioritizing. So not trying to perfect everything, but perfecting what matters, if you like, was a really key learning, and kind of owning your failure as opposed to trying to handball it over to others. That was a massive learning for me a few years ago. And it's definitely helped through COVID, where everything's changed, reprioritizing every second month, etc. It was kind of fortunate looking back to go through that massive failure personally before huge change in the next kind of subsequent 3 years. So that's probably a big one for me, which is pretty broad, but I thought I'd try and keep it a bit real and have something about me as opposed to a particular project.
Yeah, but it was really interesting there. You're talking about the kind of the personal failure, and it's helped you build resilience through the great failure, which has been the last few years of trying to work effectively with COVID being thrown at us. Madhu, maybe over to you. Same kind of question. What's one failure you've experienced in the workplace, and how did you respond? Is it personal or maybe project based? I'd love to hear.
Thanks very much again. And if it's complicated for you to call out my full name, you can shorten it down to Maddie. It's usually my call name at work and in most of the places I am at. So much like what Nick called out earlier, I'll also call out first a personal failure at work. So At my previous company, we were in the midst of launching what we thought was a really winning product. It had been a while that we had come up with something new. There was huge pressure to get something out into the market. And the R&D team had done a stellar job to actually develop something that was really winning. Unfortunately, as things materialized and we got to reality, there were some things that moved around, some things that changed, and it wasn't really going to be exactly how we had envisaged it. My failure in, at that time, being the insights lead was probably playing along and saying, for all of the effort that people have put in, let's try to get the best that we can in the market, rather than hold ground and say that we will not do it, despite the fact that there was a significant of emotional investment coming in from a lot of people. And that, I think, is the biggest burden to carry, because when you're standing up and calling something out factually versus a team of people who are emotionally and time invested in getting something out, it's a difficult call on how you get that out. How we responded as an organization later, and this is more the organization than me, because as you can envisage, the product wasn't the roaring success that we thought it would be. We actually instituted something called a Dare to Fail award. And it was meant to encourage teams to try new things without the expectation of always having a huge success parameter added to the end of it. Obviously, we had some risk measurement parameters to go along to say what's the risk in trying something and what's the kind of investment. But that brought out, and I think it took away in part the stigma from the word failure, to move that to a sphere of experimentation. And that opened up a whole new era of things. So in hindsight, wasn't all bad, but I still feel that I could have been much more forceful. And the ability to say no is probably something that I should have brought to the table at that point.
Oh, it's a huge lesson there, but I love that you're celebrating those failures. It's something that, again, I wish that we who were doing more back early in my career, it's something that's only really come in vogue in recent years. Praveen, again, same question to you, but no doubt you'll have a different perspective. Would love to hear. Again, have you experienced a failure in your workplace in recent years?
Oh, every single day, every single year. Let me start with the year 2000. My first venture was a roaring success, so that gives you the impetus to go ahead and start something new. And I was one of the few, I would easily hazard that the first company in India to set up a panel company in the year 2000. It lasted for a full 9 months before it was stillborn. So I was way out of my time. I knew there was a future. I'm a conference junkie, Peter. So you tend to go up to a lot of these international conferences, get a lot of these inspirations, bring it back to India. So that happened in 2000. We got media coverage. We got some set of clients, but it never took off because we were way, way ahead of the curve for India. And for the next 7 years, I did go on with other business ventures, but this, what in India we call it the Kida, the worm that keeps going through. And I used my wife as the bouncing board, saying, hey, I could have done that better. I could have done this different. I think it's something we would need to do. She held on for 6 years, then looked at me and said, there are two options. You bloody well shut up right now, or do something about it. In 2008-9, it came up in its newer avatar with the right time and then went through. So if you ask me, I would say a borrowed bit from Harry Potter as well, but Phoenix is the warrior god for all entrepreneurs. That failure is bound to happen, but it's the line from Rocky. How are you going to get up after you come through? But now I'm an investor, Peter, so you can imagine that failure is something that stares at us day in and day out. And I completely share with what Maddie here said, that we just need to eliminate the stigma. The very fact that we are having a panel on failure is something to be celebrated. So that's my learning. And every year I end up working with the R&D team or ideating and coming up with something that fails. So back to you, Peter.
Yeah, but I think, and you've really identified there that timing is a big element of it as well. Like sometimes it might be the right idea, but just the wrong time. And that in itself will set up the failure. And I think that kind of leads us nicely into a kind of, an element of our next question, which is failure always bad? Does anyone want to have a go at that question and maybe reflecting on their personal experience or more generally?
I would answer from an Indian context where for a long time failure was stigmatized. Failure was considered to be bad, that you are then a failure for life and that stamp comes through to you. But thankfully, over the years and more so in the near past, it's taken a turn for the better. That it's okay. You can be proud of your failures, wear them as epaulets, put on a scarf of failure. So is failure bad? But it's bound to happen at any point. You just can't. There will be stumbles, and if you have a good, encouraging ecosystem around, it helps. Now, if you ask me, how do I counter it? Well, I'm an outlier marketer. When people are talking about failing fast, I'm asking people to fail slow, but learn fast. So failure is bound to happen. But if we fail slowly, analyze that data, but learn really fast and repeat. That's the only, when I'm an entrepreneur and a marketer, we are all about making positive change happen, which is moving 1 inch forward. I do have an analogy, but I will save that for the forthcoming questions, whatever they may be. But that's a lovely analogy I use specifically for failure.
I love that. Got that, and I'd just like you to repeat it again. So to fail slow but learn fast. That's kind of the history there. I'd love, Nick, Maddie, do you have any thoughts on that, or to that question more in general, that whether is failure always bad?
Oh, sorry, Maddie. Look, yeah, similar vein. I think, yeah, I'd reframe it. It's only bad if you keep repeating the same mistakes and failures because you don't learn. Apart from that, you're not succeeding if you're kind of not failing and learning. So, yeah, I couldn't agree more. You need to be knocked down a little bit, learn as quickly as you can, and just don't repeat the same failures if possible.
Good wisdom there, Maddie. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm probably going to swing a little bit to the other side right now, wear my present hat that I do and say that at the same time, I think we need to have mechanisms in place to calculate the risk associated. There are times when you cannot afford a failure, things like reputation, for example. You cannot afford even one small slippage on that. So, it's, to my mind, there is the zone of experimentation and trying something new, trying something different, where it is good to fail and learn and grow. And there are places that you do not ever want to be a failure. Brand reputation, or your industry, your reputation as individuals, as people, as managers, definitely is something that you'd hold to a much harder yardstick. So overall, I think just like pretty much, I guess, every large organization does, there is checks and balances in place to ensure that you are moving through the right protocols and catching things in place, and therefore managing for failure as you would manage for the risk associated with that.
Yeah, I think that you raise a really important point there. And I think, many of us here on the call are in the kind of research industry trying to forecast what's going to happen with things, or measuring the outcomes of different areas. So going to Pravin's point around trying to learn very quickly on what's happening with our products or launches, or, whatever we're trying to measure, so that we can respond quickly. So I think there's some good lessons all kind of packaged in the different thoughts that you've all shared. Next question I'd like to move to, I'm approaching a significant birthday. I won't tell you which one, but it's maybe very reflective about what advice I would give to my younger self in general areas. And so I'd love to put out to the group now, what advice you would give to your younger self around failure, and what would you say that you should not do when it comes to failure? So does anyone want to have a go at that one?
Sure, let me jump in here. One would clearly be not to listen to the naysayers and stigmatizers. Now, there is a group that revels in the failure of others. Why should I add more fuel to that? And the second one is label myself shamelessly as an experimenter from a young age. So when you call it a venture, the venture may fail. An experiment is bound to fail. So I'm only experimenting with this. And that kind of answers what Maddie said earlier when you talk about a reputational risk. But if I'm going to be an outlier, I'm going to put myself out there saying I'm unconventional. And I'm going to clearly say I'm going to fail like Edison 99% of the times. So
it's
those
kind
are
of
the two.
it's a branding exercise. You're branding it as a
Pretty much. That's my advice. I'm Peter. I think I'm coming close to the same milestone as you are. So this is something that I would definitely want to pass on to my two kids as well. That hey, just be who you are. Don't listen to the negativists, but listen to those close who are giving you proper feedback, and learn to differentiate feedback from flattery, because that's absolutely important in a corporate setup. And having been in the field of research for over 2 years, trust the bloody data.
Oh, but that data, it can always not necessarily tell the truth. It depends on who's reading it a lot of the time. But I might flip to Maddie around that question though, around that advice you give to your younger self when it comes to failure. What is the thing you should not do?
I think a lot of what we think of as failure is also associated with being conformist and conforming to the rules that's set by others who have tried something before you. You obviously don't want to be a rebel without a cause, but at the same time, being a conformist means you're not bringing your whole self to the job. You're not laying yourself open to both the reward of trying something new as much as the possible slippage that might come from a certain failure. But being too much of a conformist, not questioning things around you, not pushing people and things to the limit is, I think, the first thing that I'd call out. And like I said earlier, when we just started the panel, when it needs to, the ability to say no to people and to things, obviously with the conviction that comes across from having the facts in place, but standing your ground and saying no is also something that I would call out as something important that I wish I had done when I was much younger.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that one. I was very, very good at saying yes, but saying yes all the time, it doesn't always necessarily help you out. It can sometimes lead you into some hot water. So very, very good sage advice I'd agree with. Nick, what about your thoughts?
In terms of trying to build on a couple, I think perhaps looking back, don't dwell when you do fail. It's quite easy, I think, earlier on, because you're not used to it. Two, you think that it's bad and it's not, and you start kind of trying to analyze everything, but just accept it and see it as something that's positive, not negative, would probably be one. Then I think in our context, a little bit of in relation to what Maddie was talking about, because ideally we're trying to drive something new and look forward, generate some new insight that could maybe be a new product, a new communication, a new position, or something that's hasn't been done before. Keep that in mind and that perspective that hopefully you are trying to expand a brand or a product into new territory, new uncharted waters. So in that realm, it's kind of okay to have little failings along the way, and it's probably a good thing. Otherwise, if say you're hired somewhere and you keep repeating what they've seen before, if it's data or ideas or things, then you're not really doing your job. There's got to be an expectation that there's could be some little failures. I'm not saying you aim to fail, but you aim to thoughtfully challenge, to Maddie's point. And I think with that, keep in perspective, there's going to be some failures along the way.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. And I think, being in that mindset of being kind to yourself around when you're trying to push new boundaries, because there is going to be those thorny roads that you will end up on, and it's not always easzy. I'd actually like to pick up on a point that you said, Praveen, which actually leads to one of our chat questions. So I'm going to jump over to the chat questions, and now it's moved, so I might fail in being able to read it. But it was around, you made a comment around naysayers, and we've got a question here from Peter Campbell. Hope I've pronounced your name correctly. How do you deal with these naysayers once you fail? And do any of you here on the panel have any advice around that?
You've just got to toughen yourself, know who you are, and know whom you have to listen to. So I have a panel of advisors who are brutal with me, but they have my growth and my goodwill in what they are telling, as opposed to people around who are generally bitchy and who you will need to learn how to discern these people and politely stay away. I don't respond to those calls. I don't connect with these people. Now you can claim that I'm being selfish, but yes, I'm being very wisely selfish, because I would rather have people around me who are thinking for me and for my benefit as I theirs. And that is what I basically say, that you can have your detractors as a part of your friend circle, but you cannot have naysayers and dementors who suck the positivity out. And this is a panel on failure. Those detractors will say, hey, you stumbled, you fell, but perhaps you should watch out for that. While the others would be, what happens when you generally trip and fall down? There's a couple of people who come and help you out, and the others watch and some snigger. I don't want those people around. I would rather build and be responsible for my own support system, but it starts here. And that comes through experience, you can say. But then one of the things I love about this panel is something that we can share. And this is what I call the wisely selfish goodwill circle that I select and work through. And let me give you an example. Madhumita is on this panel, and I had a writer's block several years ago. I finished my first and got stuck. And that was the last time I met Madhumita over a coffee, when she gave me a literal figurative slap saying, what the hell are you doing? You've already finished it. Bloody well go and publish it. That happened several years ago. Maddie, I'm happy to tell you I've published 11 since. So the answer to your question here, Deepthi, is you need these people. Now, Maddie and I have not been in touch for a while, but I still remember that coffee and that advice she gave her several years ago. Was that in Amsterdam, Maddie?
Amsterdam, over a pancake.
Yeah. So that's basically whom you have. You need to have around you. And that's my answer to your question.
I mean, look, we've even got like live examples within our own panel. That I swear, everyone who's listening, we did not prepare this earlier, or maybe we did, but certainly not to my knowledge. So really great there. And I also love that you have your second Harry Potter reference from the Warner Brothers Discovery family, because we're obviously very proud of our brands. But I'm laughing at me, Nick and Maddie. Any thoughts on those? How you deal with those naysayers or those dementors, as Praveen mentioned?
I might just throw out there, maybe a little bit to the essence of the question. I think with humility. So perhaps you want to try something, let's say, and some of these naysayers disagree. They don't think it's going to work, and it doesn't work. And you own it, and you know what? In this example, yes, you were right. I was wrong, but this is what I'm going to do about it and how I'm learning. Completely agree with Praveen in terms of listening to people in your circle. You've got to vet some of that noise. But on the flip side, if there is someone who's not so much a naysayer but has a different view, and they end up being right, whether by fluke or they're just kind of brilliant, then good on them. And I think take it with a bit of humility that you're going to learn from it. I think that's really important.
Good thinking there. Maddie, anything you'd like to add to the mix?
I think the big thing when you come out of a moment of failure that is on you, and you are owning that, is to separate the emotion from the facts. Because if you go down that route, you're going down a rabbit hole and you're not going to see the light of the day. If you want to learn and grow out of it, you have to keep it factual. Ask yourself whether you tried your best, whether you had the best intent at heart, and whether you did all you could in order to bring it to light. And if you are checking on all of these boxes, then there's no shame in what you came out. Most of us, work in, in places where there are enough checks and balances to ensure that there's somebody else as well watching for what you're doing. There's usually a sponsor who's commissioning either a budget or an agenda to you. There is, like you've called out, Praveen, an advisory circle that's also giving you the advice. There's people you would socialize the thought with before you bring it to the light of the day, like Nick called out. And so if you're doing all of those things, then, it's a shared loss or win. So to go down and take it personally or emotionally is not the right place. So that's definitely the first thing I wouldn't do. The other thing I would add is, as managers, for us to create a safe zone for people to voice their opinion and share their views. As if you're not doing that, then you're not inculcating the spirit of entrepreneurship, the desire to bring something new to the table, and feeling safe in experimenting and perhaps failing along the way.
Really good advice to have people in your corner. And I feel like you've set us up really nicely to our next question, which is about managers and leaders and what we need to do to create really good work environments when it comes to failure. So maybe I'll handball it back to you, Maddie, since you've already started this thread. Are there some key things that you've done or set up within your teams to be able to create those good environments?
Yeah, so the first thing is having a safe zone. And I remember at one point we used to have this process that we followed, which is somebody puts up an idea. In the first round, everybody around the table is only allowed to ask a clarification question. You're not allowed to voice an opinion on good, bad, think it will work, won't work, whatever. Just clarification questions, which helps the person build his proposal. In the next round, you can voice an opinion, but ultimately it is the person who proposed the idea, his point to go ahead and collect the opinion and call out whether they believe it is in the safe zone to experiment and try ahead or not. And with that, what you're doing is you're giving everybody the opportunity to build on the idea, but you're letting every person have their voice as well on the table. So, allowing or creating zones where people can share their voice and do it freely is perhaps the first place. The second thing that I really look for when I'm, called out to, try something which is bizarrely new, is get very clear with the sponsors on what are your boundaries. What is the boundary at which point, it will be deemed a huge risk, like it's the red button, the submarine's going to sink, versus what's the point at which we may have not achieved our destination, but we land somewhere else. And being clear about those boundaries then helps you know what's the safe zone to experiment in.
Yeah, I think that's a really key point, because I think, and it kind of goes to other themes that we've spoken about, that it's okay to fail, but maybe not fail so far that it becomes problematic, and making sure that you're learning very quickly so that you're making sure that failure doesn't get into a zone that becomes very uncomfortable. Nick, Pravin, I mean, are there thoughts that you have on this in terms of how we as managers or leaders of industry can kind of create environments to help when it comes to failure?
So any company that I invest in or any associate who joins, the first exercise for them is to write "I don't know" in bold capitals and post it. And I do the same, because when you accept that you don't know anything, it becomes easier to say, "I don't know, tell me." And the second example I give them is the car headlights. This is the analogy I spoke about earlier, that when you are driving on a highway and there are no lights, how would you go from point A to B? You can only go as fast as the headlights will allow you to see, which is 10 feet ahead. And therefore, you know what the course is, what kind of a road you're going, and you measure that. You finish a journey of 100 miles, 10 feet at a time. And that's exactly what we encourage people here to do. And paraphrasing Arun Verma's words, he's a creative powerhouse, runs a workshop called Creative Ghar. You have rebels without a cause, but be a rebel with a because. And then you find that because you find your purpose, and that makes things a lot easier. So that's something that I try to instill in all the companies I'm associated with. Back to you, Peter.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that I don't know, because I think in our industry as insights leaders, we feel like we're compelled to know the answer to a lot of things. I think there's a lot of power to actually say, I don't know the answer to that. And then it's usually, I better go find it out. But I think that's a really key thing that often gets kind of missed over, particularly for the junior researchers who really want to kind of have the answer and add value that way. But knowing that you don't know the answer is also part of the battle. Nick, any thoughts that you want to add there?
Maybe some quick fire ones. I think one, just opening up, sharing how you failed to kind of normalize failure, frame it positively. There's quotes like Michael Jordan says, "I've missed 9,000 shots in my career," and you go, that's a lot of misses for one of the greatest players of all time. So I think that's really important. And then building on Maddie's point, the context. Do you have guiding principles of what you're doing? So what's your rationale? You only have this data. That's why you made this decision, and you're trying something. That's the best that you knew at that point in time to help with the context. And then I think lastly, kind of setting expectation around, hey, it's okay to fail in these circumstances, but you have to learn from it. I think that's really important. That's probably about it, I think.
No, I think they're good ones. And I think, if anything we've learned over the last few years is that we're all humans, and it's important, I think, to be vulnerable with our teams and our people to make them feel safe. And I think it's good for us to always have that in setting up those great environments. Now, just calling out to everyone, remember there is an ability to ask questions, and I've got a great one here. I'm going to try my best with his name, who's asked us, what about those external environments? So how do you manage failure through, adverse kind of negative external environments, which we might not have much control over? Does anyone have any thoughts on that one?
Absolutely. I mean, the question is from my neighboring country, and I can relate to what is it that's in your control, what is outside your control. And from a research and insights, we clearly know what happened during Corona. The entire face-to-face interviewing part got knocked out, quant or qual, or whichever way you look at. So the market is forced to adapt. And those who had already adapted or had options grew quite faster. So when stuck with something, what is in my control, what is not in my control, what is it that I can go ahead and do? And even within the research industry, there's quite a lot more that we can do if we just roll back 50 years. How did things happen when we had no internet, when we had nothing else? So there is always a way out. Call me an optimist, but I'm a very practical optimist. And I understand the pain and where the question is coming from. And I very strongly believe there is always a way out. And we just need to persevere, write it down. And as I said, put on your bell bottoms, because some of these problems have already been solved earlier. We've just forgotten.
Oh, I feel like bell bottoms are a fail and should remain where we left them. But Nick or Maddie, do you have any thoughts on the external environment? The root of this question comes from the economic situation that's happening in Sri Lanka right now, but maybe broader external environments could also come into play. It's also okay not to know, as we've discussed.
Well, so I believe there are times when you're in the driver's seat and trying something new to, proactively, and there are times when you just have to react to what's going on around you. A situation like this is possibly just how you react to the external context. Like Praveen said, it's outside of your control to drive things anew. And it's just best managing for versus actively trying to try something new and go with it. I don't know that I can add much more beyond that, but the external context is a war in Europe right now. We're all managing for the best that we can. COVID taught us that across countries, across industries, every time that you thought you were coming out of it, something somewhere was going down. So agility and I think adaptability is obviously key in today's organizations. And the more we are structurally aligned to be able to move things fast is going to help. But beyond that, this seems to be a situation where you would react to the stimulus than being able to plan for scenarios in advance of what you would do.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think, to maybe expand on that point, communication as well. Like a lot of stakeholders are really aware of other things that are impacting us, but if they don't know, they can't then, plan themselves. And so us having good communication, I think helps to kind of pave that path in a nicer way. And Nick, do you have any thoughts you'd like to add around that?
I think the only thing to add would just be trying to present options in the context, and depending on, this could be quite a broad question, but say for instance, external factors are negatively impacting what you might do, or it means you need to reprioritize, delay things. I think explaining those options and why, and then Pete, to your point, managing expectations of the decision you've made, which could be, you know what, guys, it's actually better to not do this until we have stability, and these are our kind of thresholds of stability. Otherwise, it's not good ROI, for instance, something like that, and explaining that to stakeholders, and the fact that it'll be really, really good later, as opposed to just okay now, and framing it as a win for them. If that answers this person's question, that's how I've been going about it for the past couple of years for aviation, being so heavily impacted.
Which, yeah, I mean, in terms of external environments, I mean, COVID and aviation, you've been in the hot seat for the last couple of years, so can definitely see the parallels there. We've got another question, and as we're as a group, the question here is about when, as a group, is it okay? And sorry, as a group fail, does it really impact each individual in the group equally? When it comes to group failures, and how do you best deal with that, maybe as maybe the manager of said group?
Let me jump in here and give you a live example of what we are doing. A CEO that we are working with came to us and said that she's got rejection letters after rejection letters, and that seems to be impacting. She received 50 of them. So what we are now doing is I am personally producing a book titled Rejected, which is a compilation of those letters with a whole lot of to-do activities, and publishing it as a journal called Rejected, which is coming out at the end of this quarter, which is the best way for the whole team to celebrate. Of course, minus the name, we are GDPR compliant that way, but 50 different ways you can get rejected. When you know that, what is the 51st or 52nd way? I'm not being flippant about it at all. Deepthi, I completely respect your question. But when you work towards publishing each of that and celebrating, it reduces the stigma quite significantly. And this is a panel on failure and how we have coped and what we are doing. And we decided we're going to go publish a full-fledged journal celebrating it, send it across to all our clients and our colleagues, saying, hey, it's not only okay, we have published a book around it, which is a compilation. Might seem very unconventional, but hey, you are talking to the outlier marketer.
No,
so back to you, Peter.
We like those outlier thoughts, and I think, yeah, it helps to bring the group together when you can have that kind of shared experience of failure. I mean, Nick or Maddie, do you have any thoughts that you have around group failures as opposed to, I guess, individual failures, and maybe how you manage that as a leader? I think we'll think about that a bit more, and maybe move on to our next question. We have only limited time, so please do let us know if you have any questions in the chat box, and we can put them through. But I will have a little bit of a quick fire round, maybe just to add some energy in our last few minutes of our discussion, which is, would you prefer one big failure or many small failures? And I'm going to throw it to you, Praveen, to start.
Many small failures leading to a big one, and then this circle is repeated all over again.
So it sounds like you got both there.
Yeah.
But if you had to lean one way, would you lean to one big failure or many?
No, many smaller ones. It's easier to handle stumbles than a big fall from a cliff.
That's very, very good advice, I think. Nick, do you go the same way, or are you at the opposite end?
I was leaning to just smaller ones. You can rebound, come back a bit easier. Perhaps to build on it, if you're earlier in your career, potentially the exposure of a failure could be less as opposed to leading a massive division or team or something. So you can maybe afford to have a slightly bigger one, but generally speaking, small.
Right. Maddie, do you agree, or are you on the other side?
No, I'm on the same side. Smaller failures, yeah.
So this is the small failure group. So, because the other side of that, and I mean, I was going to do another quick fire round, and since I'm still waiting for questions, so do put them in the chat box. Would you rather fail quickly or fail slow?
Quick.
I don't know that there's anybody that wants to fail at all. I think the question is, do you learn quickly out of it, or do you take time to learn out of it? It's still painful whether you graze your knee or your hand. So
Peter, to me, it depends on the context, whether you're an Usain Bolt or a marathoner. So if it's something really quick and dirty that you want to get out, then you've got to fail fast. But if you're aiming for the medium to longer term, you could take your time failing slowly.
I like that. And that actually, I think, gels very nicely to your earlier piece of advice, which I'm going to hang on to, which is that you fail slow but learn quickly. I think that's the big takeaway I've certainly taken from this, and it's been a constant theme throughout. So the outlier marketer has helped us very much in this panel. We're coming to the end of our session, and so I just thought I would throw to the group around any final thoughts that they would like to share on today's panel, anything to do with failure, or just what you might be doing later this week. We'd just love to hear your thoughts about any reflections that you've had, or final reflections from this panel about failure and why. What is the exact question? Failing well and why it's okay to fail.
I just love the very fact that MRW has organized this panel on failure, that a bunch of us could come in and openly say, yes, I have failed, and so can you, and there's no stigma associated. And that's pretty much the same thing that's resonating from Nick and Maddie as well. But I just love the fact that we have a panel talking about failure. Thank you, Peter and MRNW.
Great, our pleasure. Thank you, Praveen. So we have time for another question or two. If you have any questions at all, you can use the raise hand signal. I'll put you on live. You can ask the panelists directly.
Might just jump in, Pete, throughout just a kind of broad question. I would say I sincerely believe in the wins that I've had has been on the back of big or small failures. So looking back, absolutely, I kind of embraced those failures. They've definitely enabled successes. I really believe in that. So don't intend to fail, but learn from it, and it will enable some wins for you.
Good advice, Nick. Maddie, any final thoughts?
I think it's important that we remember that our career, like our lives, is a marathon. We're not here for just the 100-meter bolt and done with it. And so things will not always be, it will not always be the same year, the same growth each year. So you take that in your stride, as you would do with life in general, and learn from it, pick up yourself, and go forward. As managers, it's important that we support that as well. And that's what teams are here for. That's what that's what people are here for, to support each other and grow. That's in any business, it's people first. So so long as you have the team energized, trying and failing is better than being indifferent and just going along the course of the day.
Do or do not. There is no try. It's really advice we can land on. So again, thank you all, Praveen, Nick, Maddie, for joining in this great discussion, and thank you, Amrit, for hosting us again at MRNW. And thanks a lot.